June 4th, 1942. Just before sunrise. The deck of the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise trembles with anticipation. The Pacific air is thick, salty, and eerily quiet, broken only by the mechanical growl of aircraft engines warming up. A young American pilot, Lieutenant Jack Reed, stands beside his dauntless dive bomber. He is 23 years old, sweating through his flight suit despite the morning chill. His hands tremble slightly as he secures his goggles, in his chest a knot of fear. He whispers a prayer he learned as a boy in Indiana. All he knows is that the Japanese are coming, or maybe already here. What he does not know, what no pilot on this ship knows, is that their commanders are gambling everything on a secret. They already know the enemy's plan. Every ship, every direction, every hour. Because of a single mistake made by one Japanese spy. A mistake that will turn one of the most lopsided surprise attacks in history into one of the greatest American victories ever recorded. But no one here feels like a hero. Not yet. Not when death is waiting just beyond the horizon. After Pearl Harbor, Japan's rising tide. In the early months of 1942, the map of the Pacific looked like a rising sun swallowing everything in its path. After the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Japan's Imperial Navy surged across the Pacific like a tidal wave. They captured Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and Guam, all in less than 6 months. Every American newspaper headline screamed the same thing: Japan cannot be stopped. To the public, and even to many in Washington, it looked like the United States was being humiliated, step by step, island by island. And why not? The U.S. Navy was bleeding. The battleships Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and others lay twisted and burned in the waters of Pearl Harbor. Over 2,400 Americans were killed in one morning. The Pacific Fleet was shattered, and Japan untouched, confident, triumphant. At the heart of this empire was one man, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Brilliant, calculating, fluent in English. He had studied at Harvard University and served as a naval attaché in Washington, D.C. He knew America's strength, but he also believed, if struck hard and fast enough, America's will to fight could be broken before its industry had time to awaken. That was the plan. And so Yamamoto devised a second, even bolder operation. This time the goal was total annihilation of America's remaining naval power in the Pacific. Not just a sneak attack, but a knockout blow. He would lure the last American aircraft carriers into a trap. He would attack a tiny island called Midway. So remote, so small, most Americans could not even find it on a map. He believed the Americans would rush to defend it. And when they did, the Japanese fleet, led by 4 powerful aircraft carriers, would destroy them all. What Yamamoto did not know was that the Americans were already listening and watching and waiting. The spy who almost won the war. His name was Takeo Yoshikawa, but in Hawaii, nobody knew that. To the American public in 1941, he was Tadashi Morimura, a junior diplomat stationed at the Japanese consulate in Honolulu. He wore round spectacles, carried himself with politeness, and claimed to enjoy fishing and books. No one suspected that behind those mild manners lived the eyes and ears of the empire. But in truth, Takeo Yoshikawa was no ordinary bureaucrat. He was a trained naval intelligence officer, handpicked by Tokyo for one of the most sensitive spy missions in Japanese history, to gather every possible detail about the U.S. Pacific Fleet's movements, strengths, and weaknesses. His mission would directly shape the fate of the coming war. Yoshikawa arrived in Hawaii in March 1941, 9 months before Pearl Harbor. Every day he watched. He took long walks near the harbor, memorizing ship positions. He rented planes for sightseeing flights. and flew circles above military installations. He even swam off beaches near naval bases, claiming to be a fan of the ocean. He took notes constantly. How many destroyers were docked? Were carriers in port? Did ships go out on weekends or stay moored? Where were the fuel tanks? The dry docks? The anti-aircraft guns? Every week, he sent coded reports back to Tokyo through the Japanese consulate's radio room. Those reports would help Admiral Yamamoto craft the exact attack plan used at Pearl Harbor, down to the minute. In many ways, Yoshikawa's work was terrifyingly effective. He helped Japan achieve what no other foreign power had done in American history, a direct, devastating strike on U.S. territory. But his success came with a price: confidence. By mid-1942, Yoshikawa was still in Hawaii, still spying. But something had changed. After the stunning victories across Asia and the Pacific, Japanese high command began to believe their own myth, that the Americans were disorganized, weak, and incapable of strategic thinking. And because Yoshikawa had served so well before, they trusted him again, perhaps too much. In the weeks leading up to Midway, Tokyo asked its agents to clarify one key piece of intelligence. What exactly was the meaning of the American code AF? Japanese code breakers suspected that AF referred to Midway Atoll, but they were not sure, and they needed confirmation before launching a massive fleet across the Pacific. That task should have fallen to spies like Yoshikawa. But this time, things went differently. Yoshikawa had no direct way of verifying what AF meant. He was not able to intercept communications or directly access American plans. His sources were limited. Worse, Japanese intelligence procedures were disorganized and decentralized. Army and Navy intelligence did not always share information. Field agents lacked proper cryptographic tools. And time was running out. Instead of confirming the target through reliable spycraft, Tokyo guessed. They gambled that AF was Midway. They were almost right. But across the ocean, in a weathered building at Pearl Harbor, a group of American code breakers were already ahead of them. The Americans had set a trap, and Japan had just walked into it. The quiet genius of Station Hypo. It was not the kind of place that screamed heroism. In fact, Station Hypo was hidden in the basement of an old building at Pearl Harbor, its walls stained with mold, and the air thick with cigarette smoke and the hum of clacking typewriters. No one wore medals. No one flew planes. Most of them did not even carry weapons, but what they carried was something even more dangerous: information. And at the center of it all was one man: Joseph John Rochefort. Joe Rochefort was an unlikely savior, slouched posture, cigarette always dangling from his mouth. He wore a bathrobe to work and a red smoking cap his team called the Brain Burner. He was not a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a code breaker, obsessive, eccentric, and brilliant. Rochefort led a small team of cryptanalysts tasked with deciphering Japan's naval code, JN-25. That code was no ordinary cipher. It was massive, tens of thousands of five-digit groups, changed regularly, laced with redundancies, and intentionally confusing. It was, by every measure, a monster. But Rochefort's team had been chipping away at it since before Pearl Harbor. And by May of 1942, they had cracked just enough to read fragments. Dangerous, incomplete, but valuable. Among those fragments was a term that kept appearing: AF. In Japanese messages, AF was clearly the target of a coming attack. But where was AF? Was it Midway? Or was it somewhere else? Hawaii? The West Coast? The stakes were enormous. Guess wrong, and the U.S. Navy could be ambushed again, maybe destroyed for good. Rochefort had a hunch. His gut told him that AF meant Midway. But a hunch was not enough. He needed proof. the kind of proof his superiors in Washington would not be able to ignore. So he devised a trap. Rochefort asked the commanding officer at Midway to send out an unencrypted radio message, a simple, ordinary-sounding transmission. Midway's desalination plant is broken. We are low on fresh water. The message went out in plain English, fully exposed, like bait dangling on a hook. 2 days later, Japanese radio traffic lit up. Their encrypted messages mentioned that AF was low on fresh water. That was it. Confirmation. A single fabricated detail had pierced the veil of enemy code. Now there was no more guessing, no more doubts. AF was Midway, and the Japanese were coming. Rochefort sent the decrypted analysis to Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Nimitz did not hesitate. He ordered 3 American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, to sail to Midway and prepare for battle. The trap was now set, not by the Japanese, but by the Americans. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy would not be caught by surprise, thanks to a man in a bathrobe, a broken code, and a lie about fresh water. America's gamble, outnumbered, outgunned, and still going. In late May of 1942, 3 American aircraft carriers slipped quietly out of Pearl Harbor. The USS Enterprise, the USS Hornet, and the USS Yorktown, still scarred from battle in the Coral Sea, formed the heart of a desperate plan. Together, they would sail to a lonely speck of land called Midway Atoll, a coral reef no wider than a small town, sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There, they would wait and hope. They were not supposed to win. On paper, Japan had every advantage. 4 aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, each carrying dozens of seasoned pilots who had tasted victory at Pearl Harbor, the Philippines, and the Indian Ocean. Over 250 aircraft, battleships, cruisers, submarines. By contrast, the Americans had fewer planes, fewer ships, and fewer men. The Yorktown had been bombed just weeks earlier and was patched together in a miraculous 48-hour rush job. Some of its elevators and compartments were still damaged, but it sailed anyway. Midway itself had limited defenses. A handful of long-range bombers, a few torpedo planes, and men who had never seen battle. Everyone knew the odds. Everyone knew the risks. But thanks to Rochefort and the code breakers at Station Hypo, Admiral Nimitz knew something far more valuable: exactly when and where the Japanese would strike. So he devised a bold plan. The Japanese expected the American carriers to show up after Midway was already under attack, but instead, Nimitz placed them far to the northeast, hidden beyond the enemy scouting range. He ordered them to remain radio silent, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was a game of nerves, a chess match across thousands of miles of ocean, and every move had to be made in near total silence. For the American pilots aboard the carriers, the waiting was unbearable. On June 3rd, the first reports came in. A Japanese invasion force had been sighted. Destroyers, troop transports, battleships, approaching Midway from the west. Then, early on the morning of June 4th, American scouts spotted the enemy carriers, the heart of the Japanese fleet, the same carriers that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier. This was it, the moment Admiral Yamamoto believed would finish the job he had started. But instead of finding a crippled American fleet scrambling to respond, his carriers were sailing straight into a coordinated ambush. Still, it would not be easy. The Japanese had the initiative. Their planes were already in the air, heading for Midway. Their decks were organized. Their crews were well drilled. One mistake, one delayed order, one missed opportunity. And the Americans could lose everything. For the pilots sitting in cockpits aboard the Enterprise and the Hornet, the green light came with a jolt. They were handed coordinates, mission briefings scribbled in haste, and the cold silence of men who might not return. Engines roared. Bombers rolled down the deck. Torpedo squadrons launched in tight formations. The sky filled with the buzz of propellers and the scent of oil and salt. No one knew what would happen next. They had the element of surprise, but they still had to earn the kill. Into the fire. Sacrifice at sea. The morning of June 4th, 1942, clouds hung low over the Pacific as dozens of American aircraft flew toward what they believed was certain death. They had no radar, no fighter escort, no backup. The first wave to make contact with the enemy was Torpedo Squadron 8, known as TBT-8, flying from the USS Hornet. 15 slow, outdated torpedo bombers skimmed just above the ocean, struggling to maintain formation. Their mission was simple, but suicidal. Fly directly into the teeth of the Japanese fleet and drop their torpedoes at close range. They knew they were dead men flying. Above them, Japanese Zero fighters spotted the low-flying bombers and dove like hawks. One by one, the American planes were ripped from the sky. Machine gun fire shredded cockpits. Wings tore apart midair. Pilots crashed into the ocean in flames. Not a single torpedo hit its target. 14 of the 15 planes were shot down. Only one pilot, Ensign George Gay, survived. He floated in the water, hiding beneath his seat cushion, watching the battle rage above him as his friends sank beneath the waves. And yet, that suicidal charge had changed everything. By forcing the Japanese carriers to launch wave after wave of defensive fighters, Torpedo Squadron 8 had disrupted their rhythm. The Japanese now had dozens of planes in the air, low on fuel and scattered. Their carrier decks, once models of precision, became chaotic. Then came another wave, this time from the USS Enterprise and the USS Yorktown. Torpedo Squadron 6. Torpedo Squadron 3, more brave men, more heavy losses. Still no hits. It was disaster. From the surface, it looked like the Americans were being slaughtered. And they were. Wave after wave, brave crews flew into a storm of bullets and fire, and vanished. But then came the moment that changed everything. At 10:22 a.m., 3 squadrons of American dive bombers, delayed, lost, low on fuel, appeared out of the clouds. They had been searching for the Japanese fleet for hours. Confusion and bad weather had scattered their formations, but by sheer luck and some instinct, they arrived at the perfect moment. Below them, the Japanese carriers were vulnerable. Their decks were crammed with planes being refueled and rearmed for a second strike on Midway. Bombs and torpedoes lay scattered. Fuel hoses ran like veins across the wooden decks. The Japanese air patrols had been drawn down low, chasing the torpedo planes. No one was watching above. In a coordinated dive, the American bombers roared downward. 3 carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were hit within minutes. Explosions tore through the decks. Planes erupted into fireballs. Japanese sailors jumped into the sea, their bodies engulfed in flames. Officers screamed orders that no one could hear. Within 5 minutes, 3 of the 4 Japanese carriers were burning wrecks. The smoke rose so high it could be seen for miles. Everything Admiral Yamamoto had planned, everything the Japanese had built, was collapsing in real time. But the battle was not over. One carrier remained, the Hiryu, and she was angry. The last strike, Hiryu's revenge, and Japan's collapse. Smoke still billowed from the Pacific horizon as the United States Navy scored one of the most devastating blows in naval history. 3 of Japan's 4 frontline aircraft carriers, the Akagi, the Kaga, and the Soryu, were dead in the water, consumed by fire and fury. But the battle was not finished. Far to the north of the burning chaos, the fourth Japanese carrier, Hiryu, meaning flying dragon, had escaped immediate detection. Her flight deck remained fully operational, her aircraft still fueled. Her air crews, though shaken, were alive, alert, and vengeful. At precisely 10:45 in the morning, Hiryu launched her first wave, 18 dive bombers escorted by 6 Zero fighters. Their target, the USS Yorktown. The Yorktown had already endured more than her share of punishment. Just 1 month earlier, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, she had taken heavy damage. Her repair crews worked night and day to patch her together in less than 3 days. A miracle of American engineering. Now she faced annihilation. The Japanese bombers descended through scattered clouds and flak bursts. American anti-aircraft guns opened fire, filling the sky with steel. Explosions rocked the air around the formation, but it was not enough. 3 bombs slammed into Yorktown's deck. One tore through the flight deck and exploded below. Another ignited fuel lines. Flames shot skyward. Crewmen scrambled to put out fires as the ship began to list slightly to port. But even then, she did not die. Damage control teams worked with speed and precision. In under an hour, the fires were mostly contained. The ship leveled out. Power was restored. Yorktown's crew braced for another wave, not realizing it was already on its way. Just after noon, Hiryu launched a second strike. 10 torpedo bombers, again escorted by Zeros. This time they came in low and fast. Despite furious American resistance, 2 torpedoes struck the Yorktown on her starboard side. The shock lifted the entire ship out of the water. Compartments flooded, power failed, alarms blared. Captain Elliot Buckmaster gave the order to abandon ship. Hundreds of sailors leapt into the sea, clinging to rafts or floating wreckage. Smoke and steam hissed from the crippled carrier as she began to sink slowly beneath the waves. For the Japanese pilots watching from above, it looked like a clear, symbolic victory, a counterpunch worthy of Pearl Harbor, but they had made a critical mistake. They believed they had sunk 2 different American carriers, not realizing that both strikes had hit the same ship, the resilient, battle-scarred Yorktown. Meanwhile, the USS Enterprise and USS Hornet still had dozens of planes in the air. At roughly 3:30 in the afternoon, American scout planes spotted Hiryu. The final dragon had been found. This time, there would be no delay, no confusion. The Enterprise launched a final strike. 24 dive bombers, fueled by vengeance and guided by precision. Just before sunset, they descended on Hiryu. 1 bomb hit forward of the island. Another struck near the rear elevator. A third detonated near the engine room. Within minutes, fire engulfed the carrier's deck. Secondary explosions tore through hangars and ammunition stores. Pilots still on board died before they could reach their planes. By nightfall, Hiryu, the last hope of Japan's carrier force, was ablaze from bow to stern. The next morning, June 5th, the order was given to abandon ship. She sank not long after, taking hundreds of sailors and airmen with her to the bottom of the Pacific. 4 of Japan's fleet carriers, the very same 4 that had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, were gone. Over 300 Japanese planes were destroyed. More than 3,000 men lost. The cost was staggering, not just in lives, but in experience. The Imperial Japanese Navy had spent decades building and training its carrier pilots. Many of its best officers had perished in a single day. The tide had turned. And the Pacific, for the first time in the war, belonged to something Japan feared far more than American ships. It belonged to American momentum, the price of arrogance, consequences, and characters. The Pacific was quiet again. The fires had gone out. The twisted wrecks of 4 Japanese carriers lay silent beneath the waves. The ocean, once the stage for rising empires, had swallowed the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy in just one day. But the consequences of the Battle of Midway were only beginning to unfold. Strategically, it was a disaster from which Japan would never fully recover. For every carrier lost, they also lost air crews. Not just machines, but men. Veterans who had flown at Pearl Harbor, who knew every trick in the book, were gone. Japan could build more ships, yes, but they could not build more experience. And unlike the United States, Japan did not have the industrial muscle to mass-produce replacements fast enough. It was a death sentence in slow motion. American factories were already in overdrive. In the coming months, shipyards from California to Virginia would churn out new carriers, destroyers, submarines, and Liberty ships at a rate the world had never seen. For every ship Japan lost, America would build 10. For every pilot Japan buried, America trained hundreds. But the human consequences, the personal ones, were perhaps even more powerful. Takeo Yoshikawa, the spy whose intelligence had helped orchestrate the attack on Pearl Harbor and whose failure contributed to Midway, was never honored in post-war Japan. After the war, he was arrested by American forces, but eventually released. He returned to a broken nation, shunned by former comrades, and viewed with suspicion by his own people. He lived out his days in obscurity, working odd jobs and barely scraping by. In interviews decades later, he still defended his role, still believed in the righteousness of Japan's cause. But there was a sadness behind his words, the quiet weight of a man whose actions had helped ignite a war, but who had lost everything in return. And what of Joe Rochefort, the codebreaker in the red smoking cap? Despite his critical role in securing America's victory at Midway, he was not celebrated, at least not right away. After the battle, bureaucratic jealousy and Navy politics led to his quiet reassignment. No medals, no headlines. He was sent to a training post in San Francisco, away from the front lines of the war he helped turn around. It would take decades before Rochefort's contributions were formally recognized. In 1985, 43 years after Midway, he was posthumously awarded the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. His legacy today lives on in every intelligence officer and every silent victory earned with nothing but knowledge and nerve. As for the men who flew, the ones who climbed into fragile cockpits and charged into walls of fire, their lives would never be the same. Some came home heroes. Many did not come home at all. Ensign George Gay, the lone survivor of Torpedo Squadron 8, floated in the Pacific for over 30 hours, watching as the war raged around him. He would later say that he felt the spirits of his squadron with him every time he closed his eyes. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, stood on the deck of the USS Enterprise just days later and said simply, "We were lucky, but luck always favors the prepared." Midway was not just a battle, it was a mirror. It exposed the overconfidence of Japanese planners, the fatal assumption that their codes could not be broken, their plans not anticipated, their forces not challenged. It revealed the quiet strength of America's intelligence community. Men and women working in shadows, changing the course of history without ever firing a shot. And above all, it proved that in war, arrogance kills. Midway was won not by overwhelming firepower, but by information, intuition, and the willingness to act, even when the odds were terrible. The battle that rewrote the war. In military textbooks, Midway is often described as a turning point, but that phrase barely captures what really happened. Before Midway, Japan ruled the Pacific with confidence. Their empire stretched from the shores of China to the jungles of New Guinea. They had not lost a single major battle at sea. Their soldiers believed they were invincible, backed by divine wind and righteous cause. After Midway, that illusion shattered. Japan would never again launch a major offensive across the Pacific. From that moment forward, their war became one of defense. Retreating island by island, beach by beach, mile by mile, as the United States pushed westward. Midway was not just a tactical victory. It was psychological. It proved that the Japanese code could be broken. It proved that the United States could strike back. And most importantly, it proved that even the most well-planned ambush could backfire when built on arrogance and flawed intelligence. But the story of Midway is not only about strategy and carriers and codes. It is about people. It is about Jack Reed, the young pilot who launched from the USS Enterprise at dawn, expecting to die, and lived to see the enemy fleet burning below him. It is about Joe Rochefort, the oddball genius in the basement who cracked an uncrackable code and received no recognition until long after his death. It is about Takeo Yoshikawa, the spy who outsmarted America once and then helped doom his own empire with a single, unverified report. It is about George Gay, floating alone in the ocean, surrounded by silence, watching the smoke of Midway rise into history. It is about the idea that sometimes the most important battles are not fought with bullets or bombs, but with information, with guesses, gambles, and a single well-timed lie about water. And it is a reminder, a permanent one, that war is not won by those who strike first, but by those who learn fastest. By the end of World War II, the United States had built 105 aircraft carriers. Japan had built 16. The arc of the war had bent, hard and fast, in a new direction. A direction set by the men who worked in silence, who fought in desperation, and who gave their lives to stop the unstoppable. Today, Midway Atoll is quiet again. Seabirds nest on its coral sands. Waves crash against the same reefs once stained with fire. Most Americans will never visit it. Many have never heard of it. But those who know, remember. Because what happened there, over the course of just 4 days in June of 1942, changed the course of a war and of the world. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Navy believed they would deliver a final blow to a fractured America. Instead, they were ambushed by men who had learned their language, cracked their codes, and read their minds. They expected surrender. They found resistance. They expected panic. They met preparation. They expected to hunt. They became the hunted. What began with a spy and a cipher ended with fire and fate. What shocked you most about Midway? The spy? The sacrifice? The code breaking? Tell us in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, share this video with someone who's never heard of the Battle of Midway. History isn't just about dates and names, it's about choices and the people who made them.